and we'll get right into the recipes. And I'll share a little bit about who I am, especially if you're new to this space. So my name is Jocelyn Ramirez. I'm the chef and founder of Todo Verde here in Los Angeles, and I focus on plant-based Mexican food, mostly because when I decided to go plant-based, it felt like I was stripping away all the things that I had grown up eating, all the things that felt very familiar, all the flavors that felt nostalgic to me. And so I wanted to be able to recreate plant-based versions of my family recipes. And so over the years, I've continued to learn new recipes, even ones that are not super regional to where my family is from in Zacatecas, Mexico, but it's really starting to explore cuisine in general of Mexico. And I published a cookbook last year. If you haven't picked it up yet, La Vida Verde. It is 60 plant-based recipes that range from, you know, making your own cheeses, your cremas, to ceviches and moles and so on and so forth. So we're going to be focusing on 2 recipes from the book today. If you have the book in front of you, we're going to be making this chile relleno recipe here, which is a little bit unconventional in that we're using a dried chile for this particular recipe, which is not as common as using a fresh poblano. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And so this one is on page 70, just in case you want to write down any notes in your book as we cook together. And then we are also making a chile relleno with the fresh chile version. We're not going to get into all the toppings and everything. We'll get more into just the chile itself with the filling. And this one is on page 55. And this is using the more traditional you know, version of a chile. However, I will say, because it's a fresh chile, however, I will say that a lot of times chiles rellenos are then like coated in flour and egg whites and deep fried and fried again. And so that's also another way that people tend to eat them. However, I prefer to eat them more this way, which is kind of like, my oven is ready at 350, which is kind of like, I'll wait for that to stop beeping. There we go. Which is kind of like chiles en nogada, which is a very seasonal dish in Mexico. Chiles en nogada is nogada means walnuts. And so it's these chiles rellenos, which are typically not deep fried. It's just the fresh chile. And I'll show you the process of kind of getting the chiles prepared to be stuffed. And then that particular chile is stuffed with lots of sweets like fruits and raisins and also meat mixed in. So it's a savory and sweet filling. And then it's topped with this walnut sauce. So it's white creamy sauce that goes over the top. And so that's a very, very you know, special time of the year for a lot of people when they can find chiles en nogadas, because chiles rellenos are incredibly difficult, as you will find today, to make. They're just very delicate. You have to be very careful. And so there aren't a lot of places that sell the chiles rellenos on a regular basis, or if they do, they're typically the fried ones, because those are more forgiving. You're not going to notice any tears or any imperfections in the chiles because they're covered in like egg and fried. So it's a very different type of chile relleno. I call that more of like the fast food chile relleno, you know, and this version is more of like a wow type of presentation. So let's get into it. We're going to start kind of going back and forth between the 2 chiles. I want to show you the 2 different ways that I prepare each one of the different chiles. And then while those get rehydrated and steamed, which we'll get into, we'll prepare the other elements that go within them. So let's get started with the fresh chile. And so we're using here, I'm not going to make as many. I know this recipe calls for 5. I'm going to make half of it, but I have an extra one. I wrote in there, one always tears, and believe me, that always happens. Whenever we had an order for Todo Verde and we had to make, for example, like 20 chiles rellenos, there was always 1 or 2 that would look terrible. They just were not presentable. So we always roasted a few extra, expecting that there would be a few that were going to be not as nice of a presentation. So I'm going to be using 3 today. If you're using 5, totally fine. And so these are called poblanos or sometimes pasilla. And these are actually what the chile looks like before it becomes this dry chile ancho. So these are the same chile, believe it or not. But this chile then goes on to ripen and dry, and then it ends up being this chile. And they're very, very low on the spectrum of heat. They don't have a lot of capsaicin because they're larger and the seeds are typically centered right around where the stem is. The heat doesn't really really have too much time to get into the flesh of the chile. However, I will say that every once in a while, you're gonna find one of these that is gonna be incredibly spicy. It happens to us every once in a while. In fact, my sister-in-law made chiles rellenos for a holiday a few years back, not expecting them to be spicy because they're typically not. She peeled them with her bare hands, no gloves or anything, because no problem, it's a pasilla. And she couldn't sleep at night because her hand was on fire and she had to sit at night with her like hand in a bowl of milk. It was so funny, but really sad too. So just FYI, that is a possibility. If you have a sensitivity to chiles, you can always wear gloves in the process too. So in order to get these particular chiles ready to become chiles rellenos, it typically calls for fire roasting. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to just turn on my gas range burner and essentially just start to char these over an open flame. So I'm gonna get that going as we talk here, or as I talk, I guess. Let's see. And I have it on about like a medium high heat. And these are already pre-rinsed, so they're clean. And I'm literally just gonna put them on the grate on my stovetop. And I'm just going to allow those to cook. Make sure you have some heat-proof tongs ready. They're gonna start kind of crisping up. I'm actually gonna open my window, which I didn't do earlier, just to make sure I don't get too smoky in here. Let me open up this door as well. And so essentially what you want to do is give these about 10 minutes of just cooking over the open flame. If you happen to have an electric stove, like you don't have a gas range, and so there's not going to be an open flame like this, then you could cook them directly in a pan over high heat, and they will blacken and blister, but it's just not going to be exactly the same because it's only going to blacken and blister where the flesh of the chile is touching the heat source. So since these chiles have little grooves, for example, like this concave area here of the chile would never touch the hot pan itself. So you're still going to be left here with some skin of the chile that can't be removed. Essentially, you have to get a little bit of a char on these, a good amount of char, I will say, to get them to start to release that skin. And make sure it's on a good enough amount of heat. So the trick with fire roasting your chiles as well is that you want to get enough of that char so that they get nice and blackened. But if your heat is too low, then they're also gonna get the chile itself is going to cook and become really soft and too tender, I will say. And I like the chile to still have a little bit of a body. So this is why I cook on a medium to high heat, to just really focus on charring that skin and not so much of cooking the chile all the way through. So I'm going to give this one a little bit of a turn. And you can see here that I'm getting, so this blackening that you're seeing there where my finger is, that is what I'm looking for all over. So it's gonna take about 10 minutes or so. I'm actually gonna use my back burner since I'm not using it now. And you can spread them out on your burners. There's been times where I have all 4 burners on and I'm just going for it with all the chiles. So you can see there. And they'll start to smoke. You might see, like, for example, this one is, the stem became a little bit of ash right there and it just broke off. That's totally fine. I like to keep a little bit of a stem on there because I think it makes a nice presentation. So I try not to, some people wrap the stem in a little bit of foil. I've seen that. If you don't want the stem to become burnt to a crisp, you can do that to kind of preserve it, because the stem does look nice in the final presentation. Let me check how this other one is doing. I'm focused on this one, but let's see this one. Ooh, look, so this is perfect. That is what I'm looking for. So let me give that one a flip. That is a perfect char. So let me bring it up to the camera just so you can see. And so I could already see that the skin is wanting to get removed from the flesh, you know? But when we add this to a bowl and cover it, it's going to allow steam to create more of a separation between that skin and the flesh of the chile. So we are about almost halfway there with roasting, fire roasting these chiles. This one fell through. Let me grab it. Ooh, there we go. And once these chiles have been fire roasted enough, just have a bowl handy that is big enough so that they can be completely inside of the bowl. So they're not going to be like popping over the top rim of the bowl. And we can either cover it with a baking sheet or something that's going to allow the chile to really steam in there. So something that's gonna, it doesn't have to be 100% airtight. Like you could use plastic wrap. Traditionally in Mexican households, I will say that a lot of people use, you know, the plastic grocery bags that you get when you're packing your produce at the grocery store. A lot of people use those bags and they throw these super hot off the flame chiles in a plastic bag and allow them to steam in the plastic bag. I mean, I don't know how great that is in terms of eating the chiles right after. But a lot of people swear by that because it creates a super airtight seal. So let's see how this one, I'm getting a nice char there. It might be kind of hard for me to get that little section. So you can move your chiles around to make sure that the flame is getting right where you need it to be. So I have a little section that's like a little concave section there that I want to get the heat source into. So I'll just put that right over the flame and hope that it gives it that little bit of a char. The other reason why I really love this particular process is because I love the flavor of charring. So if you've been to any of my other classes, I like to fire roast a whole lot of things, you know? Oh, this one is really good. And it's kind of plump too. I'm just gonna let it get the sides for a moment. And then this one's just about done. I'll take it off the flame in just a moment. So this is like a nice heat source for me here. This is a hot point. So this chile, I'm gonna go ahead and take it off the flame. This section here, that's not all the way charred, it's probably not gonna peel. Let me give it a second there to just get a little bit of that charring there. And so what I was saying was that I really love this charring of any ingredients. A lot, mostly my chiles. If you have, you know, onions that you're using for a salsa, like any of that, if you char it, you're gonna get this nice additional layer of flavor that you wouldn't get with, you know, just cooking it over a stovetop in a pan. So this for me is like an ideal scenario of adding a layer of flavor that doesn't require another ingredient. It just requires a little bit of time to cook each individual chile with care and attention. So there is a chile in the bowl. I'm just gonna cover it with, I'm actually gonna grab this pizza pan here. Hold on one second. Just have a pizza pan. I'm just gonna cover it over the top and just let that get nice and hot and steamy in there. So for chiles rellenos, it is traditional to peel that skin off of the chile, which is that charred bit. However, some people rinse the chile to get all the little black bits off. I prefer not to because I don't want to rinse away any of this charred flavor that we're creating right now. And then when I'm making a sauce, for example, that requires a charred poblano or a charred jalapeno, I actually don't peel this charred skin off. So if I was making a pipián verde and I'm using these charred poblanos, charred jalapeno, I just remove the stem and the seeds and I throw the chile in the blender with this char and all, and I blend it up until it's nice and smooth and creamy. So for me, it's not that it's inedible, it is edible, but it's just a part of the tradition. And that some people say, oh, it's because the skin is a little bit bitter. Others say, oh, because I've heard everything like, oh, it's because a little skin could get stuck in your stomach as you're digesting it. But then it's the same skin that similar to what you would see in like a jalapeno or many other chiles, even a bell pepper. So I'm not sure how much I believe that. And I haven't, to be honest with you, really looked into that particular ideology behind the skin of the chile. So yeah, I'm not quite sure about that one. I'm almost done with these chiles here. This one just needs maybe another couple minutes to finish up. And then this one, you can see here, notice that this part of the chile has already, because of my tongs and me handling it, because it fell down into the grate a little bit, I've already peeled off some of the skin here in this section. And you can see that it's still pretty bright, vivid green. I still want that bright, vivid green. Like it's starting to cook through, but once this becomes overcooked, it will turn into a much more deep green. And this chile will be soft and saggy. It's not going to hold up in the way that you see it now. So for me, this is like just the right time to start to think about removing the chile. And if my time cooking these chiles is complete, I'm just going to get the tip of this chile. I'm going to use my tongs to help me get just the tip into that flame there. And just make sure that I get that little char if I can. So it's going to help me remove the skin of the chile just in that area. And this chile for me is pretty good to go. So I'm going to also add this chile to my bowl. I'm going to give this one just another couple minutes. I'll turn off that back burner. I'm just going to but heat just in that area where I feel like the skin hasn't really had too much contact with the direct flame. I'll do it here so my stem doesn't get burned. And these are just about completed. So, you know, it takes about that 10 minutes of time, 10, 15 minutes or so, depending on, you know, how many chiles you're working with right now. But it's going to make a, go ahead.
Sorry, is the objective to just get it really soft and pliable? But it's okay if it's not completely blistered.
No, the objective is to get it completely blistered. So the opposite, completely blistered, not really focused on it becoming soft and pliable. It can still hold up its shape. So you don't want to overcook the chile. If anything, you want to go on a higher heat and get very centered on just getting that black blistering all over the chile. All right, so my 3 chiles, I'm over here at my counter again, and I have my 3 chiles in a bowl, just covered with the pizza pan. They're gonna get nice and steamy. I'm just gonna set these aside for about 10 minutes and let the steam just do its work here. As you can see, it's not an airtight seal. You can put another bowl on top of it. You could put plastic wrap on top of it, whatever works for you, and just set that aside. And so while that's working and doing its thing, I have a stainless steel pan that I'm going to use to start working on the other chiles. So I'll talk a little bit about the other chiles. I'm just going to preheat this pan on a medium low heat just to start getting it hot. And we're going to lightly pan fry these other chiles. And in order to prepare these chiles, which I have a couple of anchos here that are just dried, I just removed them from the container they were in. They're, as you can see, they're dried, but they're still pretty soft and pliable, which is a sign of, you know, they're pretty fresh. If they're super hard and crunchy, they're probably slightly older chiles. And so the only thing I want to do to prep them, which I probably should have done before because I'm going to pan fry them, so I'll have a little bit of splatter, is I just want to give them a good little rinse, just to remove any potential dust that might be on them, any debris. And then I want to keep the stems on this. So, you know, typically when I pan fry, I'll already remove the stems and the seeds. In this case, the chiles are still complete. I can hear the seeds inside, and I'm going to focus on removing the seeds and the stem after they've been rehydrated. They'll be a little bit more easy to work with, but very delicate. So I'm going to give them a quick rinse over my sink. And then I'm going to, you can just pat them dry with like a towel or paper towel. and then we will start giving them a nice little pan fry. So again, I have that stainless steel pan on my stove that's just preheating. And it's probably at about a medium low. I didn't put it super high or anything because I don't want to get the pan too hot. I want to be in control of my heat level. All right, let me just pat these dry. Just so I don't have too much of a splatter happening. If you see any debris or excess seeds, you can try to remove them slightly, but not a big deal. We'll have a chance to clean them up a bit more once they've gone through the cooking process and rehydrating process. And the other thing that I have going is I have an electric water kettle. I know I have a bunch of things back here today that I'm using, but I'm just gonna turn on my electric water kettle and I'm gonna heat up some water, enough water to coat the chiles in hot water. And that hot water is what's gonna help rehydrate these dried chiles and make them even more pliable and easy to work with. So the things I'm doing, I rinsed my chiles, I have a pan preheating, and I have some hot water going. That's going to be enough to cover my chiles in that hot water. So once you have those steps complete, I'm here over my stove. I'm going to add just a drizzle of oil. I'm using here just a grapeseed oil. You can use whatever cooking oil you prefer at home. You can use like about 1 to 2 tablespoons of oil. It doesn't need to be a whole lot, just enough to give it a little pan fry that kind of just coats the bottom of your pan. And so this is definitely going to be a different process than dry toasting. When you're dry toasting, you don't want to use any oil in your pan, and you're just looking for more of a blackening that's happening, a dry kind of base blackening that happens where you're just letting the chiles become a little bit more aromatic and bloom. In this particular case, you're going to see more of a sizzle, some searing, some slight browning. It might be a little bit difficult to see because the chile itself is pretty dark. Let's see if this is hot. Yeah, it is pretty hot right here. This is my hot spot. Let me lower the temperature a little bit just because of that water. It's just splattering a little bit. I'm going to be cooking 2. You can definitely cook the full recipe, which is the 5 chiles. And one other thing is you want to look for, let me grab these other chiles while these are pan frying. This is going to go pretty quickly. It's going to probably take about 1 to 2 minutes to get those done. But sometimes when you buy chiles, you have some that, you know, are a little bit smaller. Maybe I'll cook this one too, just in case one of these tears. This one isn't too bad, but obviously this one's a lot smaller. This is a broken piece. So you want to choose, I chose these 2 because they're obviously a bit larger and they can get stuffed and be a little bit more presentable as a meal versus, you know, the smaller one that I'm going to throw in here right now. And, you know, I like the way that the shape of these look. It's just going to be a really, really nice presentation as well. So let's see. I'm going to give that just another maybe 30 seconds on that side. Being really cautious. These you don't want to burn. You just want to sear them, but you don't want to get an excess blackening because these chiles will quickly become pretty bitter if you do that. So I can see that I'm getting a little bit of blistering here. I'm not sure if you're able to capture that on your end, that little brown bit. That's a little bit of blistering that's happening. And again, I'm at about a medium low heat. Control your heat. If you feel like it's splattering everywhere and it's a little bit out of control, you can always bring your heat down if it feels like it's not sizzling enough. I'm not sure if you can hear all my sizzling. You can raise the temperature. I'm going to go ahead and flip this over. Flip this one over. And again, just trying to get that same kind of blistering. I could already see that the chile is softening, especially here on this chile in this area. So I'm just looking for that same process to happen on the other side here. See how it's so soft and pliable here. You want to be delicate and that you don't rip the chile, right? And again, this is blooming, the chile. We're releasing, so you should be able to smell the fragrance of the chile. And the searing is also going to add more, another slight layer of flavor that I think is more tasty than if we were to just drop these dried chiles into hot water without doing this. I think that it adds just a little bit more depth that makes the dish a little bit more interesting. So I can see a nice amount of searing. This is maybe my hot spot here in this area. Let me switch these. So I can see a good amount of blistering that's happened here on this chile. You can see that slight browning. So these chiles for me are ready to go into a bowl. I'm going to turn off my heat. I have a bowl here. I'm just going to put these into that bowl. And then I'm just going to pour some hot water over these. So I'm going to come back to the counter. Let me grab my hot water kettle. And I'm just going to pour my hot water carefully over the chiles. Don't splatter on yourself. And then just enough to cover the chiles. And if you find that your chiles are floating, like they likely will, you can just place another bowl or something heavy on top that's going to weigh them down. So in this case, you know, I can just grab a little bowl or something that's slightly heavy, and you can just press them down like so, just to have them weigh down into the liquid itself. And so now these are going to go rest with the other chiles, and these need about 10 minutes as well too. So our chiles are kind of doing their thing right now. We're going to set them both aside. And let's focus on getting our potatoes ready, because those are also going to take a little bit of time to cook in the oven. So we want to focus on those getting into the oven before we get into any other elements. So we're just getting all our things prepped, right? And so I pre-diced my potatoes. Just a tip, if you didn't do this, is let me pan down. Whenever I pre-dice potatoes, I put them in a bowl of water. See, as you can see here, there's some water in here, and that just helps oxidation to not happen. So I don't have browning of my potatoes that are just being oxidized by the air, the environment that they've been exposed to. So when you add them to water, you prevent that from happening. Obviously, I need to strain these out, and I'm going to use a towel to just kind of pat them dry a little bit, because I don't want to have too much excess water. These are going to get baked in the oven at 350 with some oil, salt, and pepper, just really simply. I have 2 quarter baking sheets, or 2 quarter sheets as we call them in the kitchen, that are just lined with silicone. You don't have to line them with silicone, obviously. You can just put them directly on your baking sheets or whatever you have on hand. And these are going to bake for about 20-25 minutes, even longer if depending on your oven temperature, if you want to get them a little bit crispy. But in order to get them crispy, like for me, I had them in this water and just want to try to get a little bit of that water removed. So I'm going to go to my sink. I'm going to just drain this water out. If you chopped yours and you didn't drain the water out, or sorry, if you didn't soak them in water, totally okay. They might be a little bit brown, right? But it should be fine once you cook them. You can, you know, just toss them in the oil, salt, pepper, and get them roasting in the oven, and you should not have too much of a problem. Sometimes they just look a little bit different, right? They look a little sad when that happens. I'm just going to, I have some paper towels here. I'm just gonna do this, kind of pat them down a little bit, and then just to remove a little bit of that excess. But it's, again, not a huge deal. All right.
And you leave the skin on because it adds a little bit of taste to it.
Yeah, I like to leave the skin on because I like to use everything whenever possible. It's very rare that I'm like, oh, just because of aesthetics, I want to just remove it because I don't like the way it looks. I like to use everything. So, you know, the skin is edible, it tastes just fine. And you know, a lot of people swear by the fact that, you know, a lot of times the skin has more nutrients or just as much nutrients as the flesh itself of a lot of things that we eat, you know. So I typically tend to leave it on. So I'm going to just go ahead.
As well.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not another task that you have to do with the potatoes. All right. So I'm just putting them into these 2/2 sheets so that they have a little bit of space to cook and they're not too crowded so that they can get nice and brown. And so all I'm going to do, let me grab a towel and dry my hands here, is I'm just going to get some of my, again, actually I have my 1/2 cup here. I have about, so these were 3 russet potatoes is what the recipe calls for. I didn't have russet on hand and I didn't want to go to the grocery store for russet. So I'm using a different variety of potato, as you can see, but it's roughly about the size of 3 medium russet potatoes. So I'm still using the same quantity as you are. And then I'm going to use about 1/2 cup of oil. You can go a little bit lighter on the oil if you wanted. However, that gives like a nice amount of crispiness. You can reserve a couple tablespoons of your oil just so you can cook your huitlacoche at the end. So I had 1/2 cup. I used most of it, left a little bit to cook with my huitlacoche. Once these are nice and cooked through, I'm just going to add some salt and pepper to taste, because you want to make sure that these alone taste good. The potatoes without anything else should taste really yummy. Salt and pepper. And then I'm just going to get my hands in here and just make sure that everything is coated in oil, salt, and pepper. Of course, you can do this in a bowl before, but the bowl that I had was too small to do this, and I didn't want to dirty another bowl. And I think it's totally fine to just do it directly in the pan that you're going to be roasting your potatoes in. All right, here we go. And again, my oven is already preheated at 350. I'm going to put these on the top rack of my oven where the heat is hotter, usually because heat rises. So I'll put them on the top rack and let these cook for about 20-25 minutes. I'll set my timer at about 20 minutes. I'll go in and check them and see how they're looking and possibly add time if I feel like they need a little bit more time to get even more browned. Obviously, I want them to cook through completely, but I also like a little bit of that browning to happen. So I'm going to just put these into my oven. And let me set my timer to 20 minutes to start off, and then I'll come back and I'll check them. So that is the potatoes for now. And as those are cooking, we're going to peel and get our chiles ready. So we'll start with peeling the Poblano chiles, and then we'll start working with the dried chiles. And then we'll talk a little bit about the fillings and the things that go in them. So I'm gonna grab my Poblano chiles and so what you'll need, let me close this door. There's somebody doing some construction outside. So again, I have that bowl with the pizza pan over it. And you can see all this liquid from the steam that was created from that being on top, right? So that's the steam you want, that's gonna help you create that separation. And so let me pan down here, and you're gonna see these nice, beautiful chiles that are nice and steamy. And all you wanna do, again, if you wanna wear gloves, you can. All you wanna do is just use your hands to very gently, softly peel away the charred skin off of the flesh of the chile. And you wanna be gentle because you don't wanna, you can easily, like here, there's a little tear. So if I push too hard, I'm gonna tear all the way through on that section of the chile. And this is also where I start to look to see like where there might be a natural place for me to create a piercing through the flesh of the chile. So in this case, there's already a tear there. I can just use my paring knife to continue that slit down. And this is like a nice bottom of my chile, right? And this is like a nice top of my chile. Sometimes if there's like blemishes that I don't really like, that are gonna look kind of funky in the presentation, I might just try to hide that tear, put it at the bottom, and use another area of the chile to create an insert. And so really important, like I mentioned earlier, for me is to not rinse these chiles. I've seen people who literally go to their sink and they're over, or sorry, they put the chile under running water and they're doing what we're doing right now because it is annoying. It does get all over your hands and your fingers. And as you're going to a section that looks clean to get a little piece, you put the the piece of charred skin on that section that was already clean. But just be patient here. This is a dish made with lots of love and patience. And you might still have those little charred bits. I'm totally okay with that. But you can get in there and you can clean your hands and then come back and just give it one more pass through to make sure that it's nice and cleaned up. But I just don't like to rinse them because I think that it just kind of waters down the flavor that you've created here. You've created this nice, beautiful charred flavor. And the last thing you want to do is just rinse that off. It's like if you were like, oh, let me put this like you know, hand lotion all over my hands because my hands are super dry. And then, but then you feel like, oh, it's a little too much. Let me go just like rinse my hands underwater. Like you wouldn't do that, right? Because it would kind of defeat the purpose. So same thing here. I want to try to keep all of that. All right. And there is a place, if you're based in Los Angeles, there is a place in close to the neighborhood where I grew up on Gage in Huntington Park that specifically focuses on um, making and selling chiles rellenos. Like their restaurant is known for chiles rellenos. It's called La Casita Mexicana. It's these two male chefs who are from Mexico who opened this restaurant long time ago. And they are the pretty much the kings of chiles rellenos in the city of Los Angeles. If you're ever in the area, you should definitely check out La Casita Mexicana. They are going through probably hundreds and hundreds of chiles per day. They have chiles rellenos are like the star of their menu. So somebody is doing this in their kitchen probably all day long, just cooking and peeling chiles is probably what they're doing. So there's one chile. I'm just going to place it on my cutting board. And again, notice that this chile still has a body. It's not super saggy, overly cooked. It's still kind of the shape of the chile that it was prior to that cooking process, right? To the charring process. So that I love that. And because it's still going to cook a little bit more or heat up a little bit more in the oven as we reheat it towards the end, if you want to. Obviously, you don't have to, and we'll talk a little bit about that more in depth as we get closer to the end of assembling this dish. But this chile, it gets hit with a lot of heat throughout the process of becoming a chile relleno. If we were doing the one that I mentioned earlier, that's like the battered and fried chile, then it gets essentially cooked twice. And a lot of times at restaurants, if they serve those, they might cook those early on and just kind of have them sitting there, and then they might reheat them again to just get them served up, or they get cooked a third time where they get put in a sauce. So sometimes they'll get cooked in that egg batter, and then there's like a spicy tomato sauce where you cook the chiles, essentially the fried chiles, a third time. So they go from getting fire roasted, fried, and then cooked in a tomato sauce. So these chiles are like, wow, game over. I have been cooked so many times. All right, this one looks pretty good to me. And of course, again, I'll be able to give it another pass if I see anything specific. So here is this chile. It looks kind of velvety. I love the texture of the chile. When you remove the skin, it has just such a nice, beautiful texture to it. It's not shiny. It has sort of like this velvet feel to it. I'm going to take the skin off of the third one. And so far, I hope I don't jinx myself here, but they all look pretty good. Usually there's one that's like, wow, this one is pretty sad. And to be honest, those are the ones that in the kitchen, like we eat them. We're like, oh yes, I got the ugly one, I get to eat this one and stuff it with, the filling that we have. Ooh, this one's coming off really easily. I'm getting that skin off pretty easily. Hopefully I don't jinx myself here. There's a little piece here that's not as easy to get the skin removed. All right.
Jocelyn,
So
how
here,
important is it to remove every single bit of the shiny skin?
it's not super, you know, like end of the world if you do leave some of it that didn't really get charred and that is kind of stuck there. Like like I'm gonna have that part stuck, right? So you can see there that this section didn't get charred. There's no way I'm gonna be able to remove that skin. It's gonna be totally fine. So, you know, I'll try to peel whatever I can, but whatever I cannot remove, um, is it's, you know, it's not going to be an eyesore or anything like that. As long as the majority of it you're able to remove, I think that you're totally fine. And again, you can kind of position where you want to create that slit, that the where you insert, you know, the filling into the chile, on where you can, you know, you might have an area where you're like, "Ooh, I wasn't able to really get the skin off there. That doesn't look that great." So make that the bottom of your chile if possible, so that no one really sees that, right? It's going to be hidden, and no one's going to flip the chile over and inspect to make sure that you peeled it perfectly. So it shouldn't be that big of a deal. And I'm sure that there's restaurants, again, like the ones especially who fry their chiles, they probably don't peel a perfect chile, to be honest with you. They probably have, you know, bits of, you know, the blackened skin that's still left behind here and there. It's not that big of a deal. All right, so this chile is ready. So you can see here all my skin, charred skin that will get composted. Let me give my hands a rinse, and then I'm gonna come back and start to remove the seeds. Actually, I'm gonna keep this bowl because I'm going to take the seeds out. I'm just gonna give my hands a rinse just so that as I'm trying to get the seeds out, I'm not just creating another mess of like putting more bits of the skin on top of the chile. So just a rinse. You don't have to get them super duper clean. You're gonna have nice black bits under your fingernails. Totally okay. All right, so I am going to use a paring knife. So we have this video coming up soon where essentially I'm sharing my favorite tools in the kitchen. Some of them happen to be knives, obviously. This is a paring knife, which is more of a precision knife. It's typically a smaller blade. And you only really need 3 knives in the kitchen. You need a paring knife, a chef's knife, which is the much bigger blade, and a serrated knife so you can cut things like bread if you're you know, doing that type of thing. Or you could also use a serrated knife to cut other things like tomatoes or whatever it may be. But those are essentially like the 3 knives you should have. So in this particular case, we're going to use our paring knife, which is a smaller blade. As I mentioned, this one has a tear, as you can see possibly here. It has this little tear. And so I am going to take advantage of that tear and just gently use my knife to just cut through and create a nice straight line almost all the way to the bottom. I won't go all the way to the very tip. I left about 1/4 inch to 1/2 an inch of space here because as I put my hand inside, you're going to tear it a little further open. And so I don't want to, you know, I want to give it that space where like, okay, you're going to tear open a little bit more. I don't want to like already go all the way to the end and then start tearing into the other side. You're going to gently, and I have another tear here actually. You might be able to see there. You can see my finger going through. So that's going to be at the bottom. It's totally fine. And then you can see all the seeds in here. So what I try to do is just go in with my fingers very gently. Let me bring my bowl over. And then I'm going to try to just grab and pinch out as many seeds as I can, throwing them into the bowl without kind of spreading all the seeds inside of the chile, because then you get even more messy where you're trying to get so many seeds out from inside of the chile that you just you spread out yourself, you know. All right, so the other thing I do is I kind of go from the bottom and I use my fingers to kind of gently scrape up to try to get any. And I wish I had a camera where you can like go inside the chile and see my fingers inside the chile. One day we'll level up and do that for you. And so I'm just gonna go in here and check to see if there's any other major bits of chile, or sorry, seeds that I see. If you, you know, you happen to see like one that's like really hard to get, or if you try to get it, you're gonna tear it. It's not a big deal if you leave like one seed in there. These seeds are a little bit bitter, but you know, if you leave like one or two, it's not the end of the world. If you leave the whole bunch of seeds, then that's a little bit more problematic because it's going to overpower the flavor, right? So you want to try to get as many as you can, but if you're like, oh, I missed one and it's so hard to get, it's going to be fine. All right. I have just a few more left in this one. And the other thing to be cautious of is you can kind of see the, I forgot what the name of these are. Inside of the chile, there's the veins. And if you try to pull some seeds that are still kind of integrated, like they're like, they were on the grain, on the vein itself, and you try to just grab the seeds and like pull it out with the vein and all, likely that's going to create a tear all the way through your chile. So you want to be really delicate with those veins. All right, I think my chile is pretty good to go here. I have a pretty clean chile. I have a seed on my finger there. You can see there, looks pretty good to me. So that is going to be set aside. And then I'll do that with another, I'll just do the other two if it doesn't take too much time here. Again, you want to just use the tip of your knife and just create that slit down, but you don't want to go all the way down to your cutting board because then you're going to cut the bottom of your chile, obviously. So sometimes what I do is I kind of like, I kind of slice through the top layer of the skin, but it hasn't even cut all the way through. And sometimes I can kind of like dig my finger in there. And there we go. So I can dig my finger in this section and then I can kind of like tear up where I created that half, like you know, the skin is maybe like 1/8 of an inch thick. Say it's 1/4 of an inch thick, and then I slice through like 1/8 of an inch into the skin, and then I use my finger to kind of poke through and keep it going. So again, sticking my fingers in, trying to be pretty gentle here, but trying to pinch, pinch, pinch. So the seeds that are coming off are falling into my fingers, as you can see. It's falling in towards the palm of my hand. And then I'm just going to remove those seeds, being really careful of any of the ones that are on any veins. There we go. All right, there we go. So this one was actually a whole lot easier than the other one, as we can see here. All right, so there is this chile that is clean and ready to go. So for the sake of this class, I'm gonna move on. You can kind of see how I clean the chiles. And so I'll leave the third one just to work on later, or if we have some time towards the end. But I'm just gonna have my chiles hang out there until I'm done with the filling, which the potatoes have about 15 minutes that they've been in the oven for me so far. So they'll have anywhere between another 5 to 10 minutes left on the clock to keep cooking. I'm gonna give my hands a rinse. And we'll make our bean puree, which is really, really simple to make. And all I have really is, let me bring over my beans. Let me open this up. And this is really similar to what we did in our last class. Last time we did a black bean puree. This time it's a pinto bean puree, but similar, very similar process. So I just have frijoles de la olla that I cooked in my Instapot. I love my Instapot because it just, it cooks beans so much faster than if you cook them the traditional way. These have been in the Instant Pot for about 40 minutes, and they were dry beans, and I just cooked them with a little bit of bay. I threw in some chiles de árbol. Let me grab a spoon here. I had some bay leaves. You can see one of my chiles de árbol here. So it has a little spicy note to it. Salt, pepper. Sometimes I throw in dry avocado leaves. Sometimes I throw in chipotle peppers. You can really, you know, add to this flavor here. Sometimes I sprinkle in some mushroom powder or put in some whole dried mushrooms. You can really add flavor here. And then when you're having any beans or maize or anything like that, the trick is typically to eat about 5. And if they're already soft, all 5 are soft, then typically the whole pot is complete. So you'd give them a little mix and then eat 5. And these are so perfect and luscious, these beans right now. If you're using canned beans, because that's what you have available, totally okay to use a canned bean. And so essentially what you want to do, I'm going to make sure I go to the recipe here, looking at the exact number amounts, is you just want to puree these beans. So we cook them with just a little bit more flavoring here. So I'm going to do 1 cup of these pinto beans that I'm going to just cook in a tablespoon of oil. So I'll add some oil, throw in the 1 cup of pinto beans. I'll add in some pepper flakes, some ground cumin, which I already have measured out here. I just have a pinch of cumin, a pinch of red pepper flakes, another bay leaf, some freshly ground black pepper that I'll throw in there just to really get this like concentrated flavor into this particular smaller batch of beans. And then you're going to add about 5 ounces of vegetable broth to help the simmering process to happen and get them really soft. Like overcooked beans is what you're looking for. And then we'll blitz that either in a blender or with a hand blender until it's nice and smooth and creamy, and it becomes this nice luscious bean puree that's almost imagine like kind of like a dip versus like refried beans, which are a bit more thicker. So I'm going to grab my cup measure, and I'm just going to get some beans in here. Since I didn't, this is the only thing I didn't measure beforehand. So I need my, let me remove my chile, and I'll pan down so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to get my 1 cup of beans in here. There we go. That's pretty good. And let me get in my 1 tablespoon of my oil, and I'm going to turn this on the stove. So that's about a tablespoon of oil there, just to give a little bit of that fatty texture to it. My potatoes, let me check that. Let me clear my timer. There it is. I was like, where is the button? Let me check. Let me pull these out so you can take a look with me on how these are doing. Let me turn on my back burner with the beans just to get those going. All right, so my potatoes still need a little bit more time. Let me show you here where I'm at the 20-minute mark. So at the 20-minute mark, they are sizzling up. I can see that they are just starting to brown in some sections, but I want more of this to happen. So I'm going to cook them for an additional 5 to 10 minutes or so. And some of this liquid and bubbling that you see is the water. They absorb some of the water that I was soaking them in. So that is getting there. So let me add my timer. I'll add an additional, let me do 8 minutes, and then I will check them then to see how they're doing. So I have my beans in the pot. I'm going to add my chili flake, my pepper, my cumin, my bay leaf into the pot. I'm going to add a little bit of salt. And then I want to get my 5 ounces of my, you can do vegetable broth. I'm actually going to do the bean broth that I cook them in, because I already have this broth nice and handy and it's super delicious. So I have 4 ounces here that was in the, it's in a ½ cup measure. So I'll do about an additional ounce here. There we go. And you just want to cook those. It's not going to take a long time. I'm going to just put the lid on a jar, let those get nice and soft before we puree them. And that will be essentially the base of our plate so that you have like an additional something to eat with the chiles rellenos, but also that helps them prevent from sliding around on your plate itself. So there is the bean puree that's going to be working. And then once our potatoes are ready, we're going to use this front pan to start working with our huitlacoche. So just a few more minutes, we're going to get the other chiles cleaned from the inside as we wait for the potatoes to finish cooking, and then we'll just kind of work everything all together. So it's getting there. It is getting there. So for folks who are cooking along, how is it looking for you? Do you have any questions so far?
I had to continue the potatoes, like you said, for another 10 minutes because I had also washed it in water and it needed some cooking and it was still light. And then the beans are cooking now and my,
Okay, great.
yeah, peppers are ready.
Okay, great. All right. So let's get into the dried chiles. So this might be a little bit messier because these were in the water, right? And so I'm going to remove the bowl that was over them. And so now you should have this chile that is still stands up in its own right, but is definitely much softer and more pliable than it was earlier. And you have to be pretty gentle in that these could tear pretty easily. Actually, this one's filled with the liquid, as you can see here. It has some liquid inside. So it's, this one's a lot more delicate than this one actually seemed to hold up pretty well. So this one is going to have a little bit more of a chew to it. And if you want, you can continue to soak. If you have one that feels like it's still maybe not soft enough, you can continue to soak that one and leave it towards the end until it has continued to rehydrate a little bit more. So I'm going to grab my same cutting board and let me move these chiles just over to the side slightly. And I'm going to use the same paring knife. Let me bring this chile. I'm just going to try to drain. Let me bring this into the shot a little bit. I'm just going to try to move this chile around so that I can drain as much of that liquid out in the bowl rather than on my cutting board so I don't make as much of a mess. And so this one, I'm kind of identifying where I can make the incision. So let me bring this one to the camera so you can see a bit more closely. So this chile is large. It ended up being pretty large, which is a nice portion. Like this alone will be enough to fill a person if it's stuffed with cheese, whatever you want to stuff it with. In this case, we're stuffing it with cheese, epazote, and if you could find the squash blossoms, that too. Now it has 2 tears here. However, the tears for me are kind of in odd areas. Like this one's on one side, this tear is on another side. They're fairly large. So I'm actually going to have this side be the bottom of my chile. I'm not going to try to make that work to be the incision. So that's going to be hidden away, and I'm going to use this other side to create my incision. And so essentially what you want to do is, I kind of want to use my hands to like plump up the chile a little bit with air. And you want to be really gentle because this stem is hanging on by a thread. I'm going to just use my paring knife again and just poke in the sharp end, the sharp tip, I should say, of my knife to just create an incision. And there it is. And this one's going to be a little bit harder to see possibly because it's so dark, the chile is. And so all I want to do is open this up and same thing, check for any seeds, remove any of those seeds that I see, go towards the top stem of the chile and just gently use my fingers to remove any of those seeds. Let me see if I can pinch here with being very careful not to have this all fall apart on me. And it's hanging on by a thread, so this one's gonna be really, really delicate. Let's see on this side. There we go. I have a little bunch of seeds here that I'll grab. And again, same thing for this. If there's a vein that has some seeds that were growing on there, like they're stuck onto each other, just be really careful. because you can easily tear all the way through from top to bottom of your chile. All right, so this chile for me is good to go. It's pretty cleaned through. So that one I'm gonna set aside. Let me grab another chile. I'll grab the smaller one. And again, just trying to remove any excess liquid in the bowl so that you don't create a big sloppy mess all over your cutting board. It's gonna be moist on your cutting board, but you don't need it to be like filled with water. All right. Still have some water dripping there. There we go. So there's like a tear in here somewhere and the water seeped in and I'm like trying to figure out, there we go, how to get it all out. There we go. All right. So again, identifying where I want to make the incision here on this chile. And I'm going to go ahead and choose this side here. I'm going to try to kind of inflate it with air a little bit. And then again, using just the tip of my blade, I'm going to just gently create that incision. There we go. Let me tear that right there. And again, just going in. And this one does have a little bunch of seeds at the top, so I'm just going to carefully put my fingers in, and I'm going to try to use my thumb to encourage those seeds to just fall into my fingers versus like falling into the chile. Try to get as many as I can out and keep going in and just cleaning it up. All right. I can hear my beans boiling. So I only want to let that cook just a little while longer. We don't need to, those beans were already cooked, right? So we don't need to cook them too much longer. It's just a matter of them getting some of that bay leaf infusion. It's been 8 minutes for my chiles. Let me rinse my hands. Let me check on these little, sorry, not chiles, my potatoes. All right, I'm gonna leave these for just a couple more minutes in here until I'm ready to start working with them on the stove. I just want them to crisp and brown just a touch more. Okay, so I'm just about done cleaning up this chile here. There we go. Imagine if I was doing all 5. It would just be a class on just cleaning chiles. All right, so this looks pretty good to me. You might see one, like I said, one here or there. If you do, just try your best to get them out. As long as the majority of them are out is the main goal here. All right, there we go. So nice clean chilito. There's one right in the center there, ready to be stuffed. So for the this chile relleno, this dried chile relleno, we're going to stuff it with simply some cheese, some epazote, some squash blossoms. We're going to use that pinto bean puree as a base on the bottom. We can use it for both chiles, so you can essentially plate, you know, the bean puree and put a fresh chile and a dried chile next to each other side by side, and that could be your serving of the dish. For the cheese itself, for this recipe, I had used a queso fresco that was another recipe in the book. Now, I knew that it would be too much to make that cheese and do everything that we're doing, so I just wanted to focus more on the chiles. But all that to say that for chiles rellenos, you could absolutely stuff them with whatever you have on hand. If you're like, I happen to have made, you know, another kind of cheese, or I have a store-bought cheese on hand, or I made a ton of this food yesterday and I can easily stuff it into these chiles rellenos today. Yes, do it if the flavors you think make sense with each other. So it doesn't have to be exactly precisely whatever you think that a chile is supposed to be stuffed with. Sometimes they're stuffed with just cheese, sometimes they're stuffed with meat, sometimes meat in a sauce. It's really up to whatever flavor it is that you're looking for. Now, I don't have queso fresco on hand. I do, however, have some queso quesadilla, which is more of like a melty cheese on hand. And for that, I am going to have to put these chiles in the oven to kind of get that cheese nice and melty. or I could simply just sear the cheese on a pan and then put that hot cheese into the chile and just serve it that way. So either goes. In order to reheat the flesh of the chile, you will likely need to put them in the oven to get them back up to temperature right before serving, or you can serve them at room temperature and have the filling be hot. So it's up to you on what you prefer and how you want to serve them. But for the green chile, the fresh one, I typically do put it back into the oven and let the flesh of the chile just get warmed through and then serve it, just FYI. All right, so let's get into our bean puree because I'm pretty sure yours is probably cooking as much as mine is right now. Hopefully my, I was talking and talking, so hopefully my my liquid hasn't evaporated too much. I'm gonna go ahead and remove that bay leaf, which has served its purpose for today. And then I'm just going to use a hand blender and I'm just going to blend this until it's nice and smooth and creamy. So let me grab my hand blender and I'm just gonna blend directly in that same pot that it cooked in, just to get it nice and smooth. And if you find that as you're blending it, it's not as smooth for you, it feels like it's still a little bit too dense and thick, you can add more liquid to it. So you can add a little bit more of your vegetable broth or your bean broth, or worst case scenario, which is not a worst case at all, is just add a little water to it just to bring that to a nice smooth texture. So I'm going to just blend these. It's actually, I do need more liquid in these probably, just to get them nice and smooth. So as you can see, I'm just kind of blending them, breaking them down. Right now, I'm kind of like at a refried beans kind of texture. I want to get it a little bit smoother. Let me add a little bit more of my liquid to these. I'm going to add more of my bean broth. Just like a tablespoon or two of the bean broth. Let's see how that looks. And then I have a little bit more to add if I need to. Yeah, I'm going to add just that touch more. I want these nice and smooth. There we go. So I'm looking more for like this smooth, almost slightly runny texture. Let me turn up the speed of my hand blender here. And you can get these as smooth as you can get them. So sometimes a blender works a whole lot better. In this case, my hand mixer is doing hand blender is doing a pretty good job here. All right, I'm just gonna add just that last little bit of the liquid that I had set aside here and just blend that and I should be good to go. You can give that a taste for salt. Make sure you have a nice, good amount of seasoning there. Ooh, that's so good and perfect. So I'm just going to leave that aside until we're ready to start plating, and I'll add that to my plate again as the base of my dish. Just remove. There we go. Okay. And let me go ahead and get started with this front burner. So this front burner, we're gonna use to just slightly cook our huitlacoche before we add our potatoes that have been oven roasting to it. So it's not that we really need to cook through. So as I was mentioning before class started, which I haven't really talked about right now, is that the huitlacoche that we typically find here in the United States is typically jarred or canned. And I'll bring it to the forefront here so you can see it. I have to grab a dish towel because the bowl got hot with the oven being on. So huitlacoche, Mexican delicacy. It's a corn-based fungus. It's a fungus that grows on corn, and it can typically be found fresh only in Mexico. and it looks exactly what it sounds like it's an ear of corn, and it has these kind of pods of this grayish black toned fungus growing on it. And it's preserved in either jars or cans so that it can be sold throughout other areas of the world. And so whenever you buy it jarred or canned, sometimes it does have other things added to it. So it's not just solely huitlacoche. It might have onions. This one has onions, jalapeno. It has a little bit of vinegar in it. You know, it has other elements. It also says that it has corn kernels in there. I don't really see it, but it's probably just the residual effect of like cutting the huitlacoche off the corn. You do get some corn kernels that are just gonna happen to be in the mixture. And let me show you the brand that it is that I got. So I buy this from a vendor in East Los Angeles who imports a lot of Mexican goods. It's just huitlacoche, and it's a huge jar. And if you did happen to get a really big container, leave it in your fridge. You can use it to add to chilaquiles. You can add it to dishes just to add another note of flavor. And, you know, there isn't an exact one-for-one replacement of huitlacoche, but if you really can't find it, you can absolutely use shiitake mushrooms or portobello mushrooms that you would mince up and saute, and use that. I mean, each one of those mushrooms even have their own unique flavor. So huitlacoche is definitely kind of like, you know, almost like a tart kind of scent to it, and it feels kind of funky, and that's the fungus, right? That's the huitlacoche, the fungus that has been growing on the corn. So what I'm gonna do, let me go ahead and clean up my station a little bit here, is I'm just going, go ahead.
If we're cooking with mushrooms instead, do you need to clean them before mincing them?
Great question. So for mushrooms, what I typically do is I typically just clean them with a cloth. You know, if they look dirty, like if they look like they have any dirt on them, you definitely want to just like wipe them down a little bit with a good paper towel or cloth. If they're really dirty, then you could rinse them, but you typically don't want to introduce water because they're going to get really soggy. And as you cook them, they're going to stew more than they're going to brown if they have, because mushrooms absorb liquid. So if you leave them in water too long, they're going to absorb a lot of that liquid. So I prefer not to rinse mushrooms.
And
Any other
because,
question?
sorry,
Oh, go ahead.
because it's still in raw form, should I start cooking them now? Because huitlacoche is already cooked or looks cooked.
Exactly. So if you are using mushrooms, you definitely want to get those cooking now. And mushrooms, if they're minced, should cook fairly quickly. The thing with mushrooms is you want to cook them at like a higher temperature. So you want to cook more on like the medium high side of your flame versus medium low. And you want to get that oil nice and hot. And the other thing I like to do with mushrooms is I like to wait to salt and pepper them until towards the end when I feel like they've already gotten a little bit brown and crispy, because salt is another thing that is similar to, like, if you salt, for example, tomatoes early on, the salt brings the liquid out of the tomatoes even more. And so salt does something very similar to mushrooms. And so if you salt them towards the end, you kind of eliminate some of that like stewing that could potentially happen. So in my case, my huitlacoche, as you can see, is, you know, it's already been kind of like fermented, it's jarred, it's already kind of gone through its own process. I just have my front pan on at about medium low heat. I have that little bit of oil that I reserved from earlier from the potatoes. I'm just gonna add a little bit of oil to the pan. And I'm just going to bring in my huitlacoche. And I just want to saute it with some spices here. And the spices are the same spices that we've been using throughout, which I have my chili flakes. I have a half teaspoon of chili flakes, an eighth of a teaspoon of cumin, and some fresh cracked pepper. I'm going to add a little bit of salt. And then I'm just going to use my spatula here to just saute that and get that nice and seasoned and cooked through. And so you can see here the larger bits of the huitlacoche, for example. you know? So this is probably like where it was connected to the, you know, growing out of the corn. And then you see that big old chunk of huitlacoche there. So sometimes you see the big pieces, sometimes it's a little bit all kind of mushed together. I lowered my heat because it was splattering, but I maybe lowered it a little bit too low now. So I just turned that up slightly. And let me check on my potatoes. Yes, okay. So I'm pulling my potatoes out. I have a little bit of browning that happened. Maybe it's easier to see. Let me go to this camera angle here since you're already there. So you can see my potatoes do have a little bit of browning that's happened, more on this side here than on the other. And so I could still probably leave these in there a little bit longer, but to be honest, this is totally fine for me. So once you feel like either your mushrooms or your huitlacoche are, especially for the mushrooms that were more of the raw form, like they have already started to brown and sear slightly, what you're gonna do is you're going to just add your your potatoes into the pan with the huitlacoche. So I'm just going to put all these potatoes in there, both pans worth, right? I have the 2 baking sheets that are in the oven. We're in the oven. And I like it, the more crispy they are, it's always a little bit more interesting for me because I like that textural play. So if you have the time to get them nice and crispy, that's always great. And ideally, you know, if you're making this in the future, what you could also do, so I don't always soak my potatoes like I did earlier, it was just because, you know, I had to wait to cook them until we're in the class together. But if I'm just cooking at home, I don't really do that, to be honest with you. I just cut the potatoes, I preheat my oven, and I just get them cooking right away, even if like they're cooked before everything else, because I know that I'm still gonna warm them through in this mixture here. So I get them nice and crispy. There's no water added in that particular situation. And then I just mix them into my huitlacoche. Let me get the other baking sheet out. Let me fold this over a bit better. There we go. Let's see here. Let me get a good grip on this. There we go. All right. Here's my other set of potatoes here. I'm gonna just scrape those into the same pan. Ooh, the whole silicone sheet is moving around. There we go. There we go. Let me just set this down. Oh, silicone sheet, giving me a hard time right now. You're not supposed to stick to the potatoes. All right. So as I get this worked out, essentially I'm just trying to loosen these all up so that I can just drop them into the pan, mix everything up. And then my filling for that particular chile relleno, which this filling is for the fresh green chile. There we go. Try to get as much of that in there. Let me grab the silicone, shouldn't be that hot. All right, let's see if I could do this way. There we go. Most of it in there. All right, the rest of this is going to be just me battling with my silicone sheet here. All right, let me eat some potatoes because I am hungry now. Perfect. I'm just going to combine everything together. Let me lower my heat. Again, everything is cooked, so it's just a matter of warming it, getting it nice and warm through. So I'm just getting that nice, beautiful black color of the huitlacoche incorporated throughout. Give this a taste. Taste if it needs to get hit with a little bit more salt, more pepper, more of the chili flakes, anything at all that can definitely amplify the flavor.
I suppose because potatoes are so bland, and the huitlacoche has so much flavor, they kind of complement each other.
Exactly, exactly. And you know, I think that the potatoes, if they're crispy, they're bringing kind of their own kind of flavor to the forefront with that nice crispiness, you know? All right. So I just added another little pinch salt here. I need another little touch and give it a taste again. Perfect. Another pinch of salt. I didn't really add too much salt to the huitlacoche mixture, I don't think. All right. So this is ready to go. And so what I would do is either stuff the chiles and serve immediately, or you can stuff the chiles, which I'll grab one of my green chiles here. And essentially all you want to do, let me grab my tongs just to help me in this process, is you want to grab enough of your mixture and just gently drop it in. Sometimes it helps to use sometimes I use like a scoop that I've shown you in other classes. It looks like an ice cream scoop, but it's a measuring scoop. And that's also how we make sure that we're kind of getting the same amount of filling in each one of the chiles. So right now my chile is like room temp. And because we're in winter here, it's not super cold here in LA, but you know, it's not hot either. So you can choose if you want to add these, and you can add it right back to like the potato baking sheets that you just used. I like to have a little bit kind of like bursting out of the seam so that it looks a little bit more exciting, right? So have it stuffed like that, add it back to your baking sheet like so. And once you get them all stuffed, add them back into the oven. You can drop the temperature from 350 down to 200 degrees. And you just want to warm it through. You're not trying to cook it. If you do pop it back in at 350, it's going to be really fast. You're just going to really warm it through, and you can probably take them out within 5 minutes or so, and then just go ahead and serve them up. You can serve them with other condiments, like in the recipe, I do serve them with tamarindo salsa and cashew cream and a few other elements. You could definitely serve them with whatever sauces you have on hand that you'd want to play with. So let me do one more, and then we'll stuff the other chile. Let me just open this up slightly. And this one is like a little bit harder to keep open here. So let me actually place this one down. Let's see if you can see what I'm doing over here. Let me turn this way and let's see if you can see. So I'm just going to use one hand to kind of like open up as much as I can of the chile, use my tongs, and then just try to gently stuff it. There we go. And some of it's going to fall to the sides. Just pick it up, try to put it into the chile itself. There we go. And of course, this is hot, so be careful. This is definitely something where like you need to get a little bit used to touching hot food. It's just the nature of it. Even as you take it out of the oven when it's hot, you can use a spatula, but I still use my hand or a tong to kind of guide it onto the plate even so that it doesn't fall apart. All right, let me rinse my hands. Now let me get my other chile stuffed and put it on the other baking sheet. Let me get this baking sheet out of the way. So for this other chile, I'm gonna gently put them onto this baking sheet if I wanna get them nice and hot. I think you can see, right? Kind of in the distance there a little bit. I guess I could also bring them here to the forefront, to the counter. Let's do that because this baking sheet is cool enough. So I'm going to just pan down so you can see here. And I'm just going to stuff these with some cheese that I have, which I actually already took out. Okay, perfect. I have my cheese here. So I made a couple rounds of cheese earlier this week. This one is actually one that I just popped in the fridge a little earlier, so it's a little softer. It's been fermenting. It's more of a melty cashew-based cheese, and you can see it's a little bit soft to the touch. It's going to melt a little bit in the oven. So I'm just going to add some cheese that I'll just kind of slice up and insert throughout. So I'm just going to just cut some pieces. The smaller, the easier it is for my cheese to melt. Let me stuff it in this one here. And then as this heats through, it'll kind of melt. And then I will hit it with the epazote and the fresh herbs afterwards. I'm not going to do it now, right? Because if I did it now, it's going to wilt and get really, you know, it's not going to look the way that I would prefer it to look in the serving process. So this chile is really big. I'm not going to stuff it too much with a bunch of cheese, but let me get another slice here. And the reason I'm using the softer one that hasn't been sitting in the fridge as long as the other one, let me show you the different texture here, is just because this one is going to melt a whole lot faster because it's already a little bit closer to room temperature. Now this one, you can see, has been sitting in the fridge and isn't as soft as this one. Like, look at how this one is kind of like hanging over. It's softer. It hasn't been set in the fridge. This is a queso quesadilla recipe that I've taught a few classes on. It is a recipe in the book. It's the queso quesadilla recipe. So I'm just cutting another chunk of cheese. I'm actually going to just add this big old chunk of cheese right into my chile. Let me actually turn it this way. There we go. And the thing to be cautious of with this chile is that the red is going to stain the white cheese as you're like inserting it. So just be cautious of that so you don't get too much of that red hue on the cheese. And it's just going to look cleaner when you serve it, right? It's going to look, the presentation will be a little bit better. I still have my oven at 350. I'm going to go ahead and just pop these. Again, if you're just trying to heat slightly and you want to walk away for a few minutes, you can bring your temperature down to 200 just to warm your chiles through. Otherwise, I'm at 350. I'm just going to pop those in there for just a few minutes and then bring them out and have them essentially ready to eat. And then I couldn't personally find the squash blossom flowers. They weren't available at the couple Mexican grocery stores that I went to. Sometimes they're a little bit more tricky to find. It's okay if you're not able to find that particular ingredient. You can definitely use, in this case, I'm going to be using the epazote and cilantro. If you had other edible flowers on hand, you can definitely stuff it. It's you know, it's one thing that tastes very unique that people in Mexico eat is the squash blossom flowers. But also the reason that I use it in this particular dish is just because it looks, because of the contrast and color, it just looks so beautiful with the, you know, the white cheese, the fresh green epazote, and these orange squash blossom flowers. But you can also capture a beautiful plating using other elements too. So the last thing I'll talk about before we quickly pull these chiles out of the oven is the epazote. Let me bring my cilantro out too. And of course, if you have store-bought vegan cheese, you can also use that inside of the chile. You might find whole cheese, meltable cheese, or you might find shreds. You can use either and stuff them. If you are using a store-bought, I think that the brands that I most like and enjoy are definitely Miyoko's. Miyoko's store-bought cheese is great, and so is Follow Your Heart. There are a lot of other vegan cheeses out there if you're into them. I'm not personally like a huge fan of the other cheeses. There's one that I got not too long ago, which is an oat-based one, which is called, I haven't finished using it though. I hope it's still good, but it's a oat-zarella. So, you know, I have these that I can just quickly show you. Mozzarella is an oat milk based cheese that it's supposed to melt like a real cheese. You can use something like this in there. The texture is kind of soggy, and I was like, oh, this isn't going to work, but actually the flavor is pretty good in this one. So definitely recommend. But definitely my favorite of all is going to be Miyoko's. So Miyoko's Creamery, although her shredded cheese is just pepper jack and cheddar, she doesn't have like a mozzarella or, you know, something like that. So you'd have to kind of adjust to have the flavor be either a cheddar or pepper jack cheese. And then Follow Your Heart, I particularly like their the provolone. That's my favorite of theirs. I'm not a huge fan of the mozzarella. I'm not a huge fan of all the other things, but the provolone is the one for me. So if you're new to plant-based cheeses, it's a matter of like buying and taste testing and figuring out which ones you enjoy, which ones you don't enjoy. If you don't enjoy them, for it to not be a total waste, like try to figure out which ways you could use them, whether you just kind of mix them into a soup to make it kind of cheesy, but it's kind of masked by the flavor of whatever else is in the soup, so that you're not kind of eating it as the main kind of star of the dish. I do that sometimes when I'm like, oh, I didn't really like this cheese, but I don't want to just throw it all away, right? Okay, so epazote. Epazote is an herb that is also very specific to Mexico. It's an herb that doesn't have like a direct equivalent. Like I can't say if you don't have it, use this other thing. Sometimes people will use like watercress, or fresh oregano is really strong. So epazote also has a strong flavor. It feels, if you don't have it on hand right now, it feels very earthy. It has like a touch of like almost like a licorice in the back note, but also a very strong like cruciferous, like herbaceous flavor to it. It's really delicious. You can eat it raw. The other thing that we forgot to add is if you do have the epazote, you can drop it into the bean puree, and that flavor of the epazote will just kind of add another element of flavor to it. But it's such a delicious herb, and it's gonna stand out on its own for this particular dish. So, and of course, cilantro. I don't need to talk too much about cilantro. I'm pretty sure you've all had that. So let's get into these platings here. So I have my chiles, the fresh ones that are definitely warmed through and ready to go. I'm gonna grab a plate and I'm gonna spread that bean puree. I'm gonna grab one of these plates. There we go. So grab a nice, beautiful plate. Grab a little bit of that bean puree. I'm gonna grab a spoon here. Pick up a little bit of this puree. Doesn't have to be a whole lot. If yours thickened up, you can add more of your broth to it. You don't have to add a lot of the bean puree. It's kind of enough to give like a nice little serving of it. But more than anything, enough to kind of get the chile stuck to your plate as well. So you can kind of spread it out in whatever kind of decorative way that you want. So I have my beans here.
Can you also be using dried epazote leaves?
Dried epazote you could use. However, I will say that the dried epazote is going to be a little bit more strong of a flavor. So you just need to be cautious of that, of not overdoing it with the dried epazote. All right, so I'm going to just use my hand here. Let me slightly pan down. Let me bring my plate a little bit closer. So I'm just going to slide a spatula under, use my hand, and there's one chile there, ready to go. Let me push this back. Let me move some of these plates. Get this out of the way. Push this back. Let me grab my other chiles, hoping that the cheese is nice and melty. We'll see right now. If not, you can leave them in a little bit longer. If you were using a cold cheese like the queso fresco, I actually don't reheat those chiles. I just serve as is. So I have a little bit of salty, soft meltiness. I could leave those in, but I know we are over time. So If you have the time, if you're cooking at home, leave it in until you get that nice meltiness that you prefer. And if you like it to get a little bit brown and crispy, you can do that too. These chiles are going to be more forgiving than the fresh chile, which will get even more softer and kind of saggier. I'm going to just use my hand to gently bring that chile onto the plate. Let me bring this to the forefront here. And then all I'm going to do is grab some fresh epazote leaves, some fresh cilantro leaves, and you just want to kind of tuck it in. It's hot, so be careful. You just kind of want to tuck it in throughout, just to give it that nice, beautiful look and feel and freshness. If you have a cashew cream on hand, if you have the book and you want to make a cashew cream, you can top the fresh chile with that cashew cream. And you have your chiles rellenos ready to go. There we go. So you have all this like green coming out of the other one. If you had the squash blossoms, it'd be a play on the orange and the green. And then you want to get a knife and a fork. Let's see if I can cut it with a butter knife here. And you can just use that to kind of cut through. And you get a little bit of the beans, a little bit of, in this case, the huitlacoche, the potato. You can see a little bit of that corn string or the chile string there, and give that one a taste. And you can definitely taste the huitlacoche. It's its own kind of strong flavor. The chile is like tender, but still a little chewy in that it's not mush, you know, which I appreciate in a chile relleno like this. And it's just the right amount of heat. So it's not extra spicy. It's totally a perfect amount. And I like the beans in there because it kind of helps to kind of bring it all together. Now let me take a bite of the other chile here. And so this one, I might need to get my other knife. No, actually, I think I can tear through. Yeah, there we go. This one's soft enough. So I have a little bit of cheese that's kind of melty in here, as you can see. A little bit of that like soft, gooey, melty cheese in there. Let me make sure I get an epazote. A little bit of cilantro. All right, you're gonna just see me battle with my plate here. There we go. And let me take a bite of this one. This one is really special to me because the chile flavor, very, very low on the heat level, almost a little bit sweet. So imagine like a just very lightly spiced raisin. So it's this, it's definitely a different texture than the fresh chile. You have a little bit of cheese in there. If you're using the queso fresco, it's like a nice fresh cold cheese. And then the epazote is like a punch of herbs in your face, which make it pop. So I hope you enjoy these two different takes on chiles rellenos, all plant-based. But again, stuff them with whatever you have, whatever you love to eat already, whatever you already have in your fridge that you need to just eat. You can make it fresh and exciting, adding it into a chile relleno. The most important thing is that you know kind of the process of preparing the chiles themselves, and then anything else is pretty fair game, as long as it makes sense that it goes well together.